All this week, we are looking at the impact of the wave of marijuana legalization. One of the key questions is whether marijuana is generally more potent now and whether that poses an increased health risk for some people. It's also coming amid debates surrounding the larger benefits and risks of marijuana. For our Leading Edge segment, Miles O'Brien sifts through the science around what's known and not known about these claims. It's part of a close look at the green rush around the country.
For connoisseurs of cannabis, these are heady times indeed.
It's pretty much like Toys R Us for adults now.
We caught up with Levon at a jam dispensary in Leicester, Massachusetts. He had just bought some cannabis oil and a pre-rolled joint.
No one really gets in trouble with this, so it's nice not being hassled and things like that just for smoking weed.
The state is among 11 and the District of Columbia that have legalized recreational use of marijuana for those 21 and older.
Can't complain there one bit. Looking forward to enjoying this when I get home.
Massachusetts is among 47 states that have sanctioned cannabis for medical purposes as well. It's a stark contrast from the days of reefer madness, the war on drugs, and the vilification of a plant that humans have used for more than 2,500 years. Precious little of it informed by research.
What an insult it will be to what we are and whence we came if we do not rise up together in defiance against this cancer of drugs.
It was much more motivated by socio-political pressures, if you will. Not a ton of real scientific data. A lot of assumptions were made.
Neuroscientist Stacy Gruber is an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and director of the Marijuana Investigations for Neuroscientific Discovery program at McLean Hospital. She has been studying how cannabis affects the human brain for more than 2 decades.
We're still playing catch-up in terms of trying to understand what we really need to understand about cannabis and cannabinoids and how they work.
She's doing her best to fill the gaps of understanding by imaging the brains of teens and emerging adults, some heavy cannabis users who started very young, and others who are weed-free. When they conduct cognitive tests, their brains look very different. They use different regions to get the job done.
These patterns of activation suggest there's really something different in the way they're processing the information.
The data suggests that heavy recreational use of cannabis during adolescence and emerging adulthood inhibits the development of the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center of the brain. And Gruber also reports evidence of changes in the white matter, which connects various regions of the brain. The white matter in pot users is less organized and coherent. These individuals also self-report more impulsive behavior.
We know some things for sure. We know that there are likely negative effects if cannabis becomes a regular part of one's routine when we're neurodevelopmentally vulnerable. That is, we're just still growing up, we're under construction or half-baked, better way to put it.
And the pot is much stronger than it was a generation ago, when it contained on average about 5% THC, the psychoactive main ingredient in marijuana. Today, the plants themselves have been bred to be much more potent, 12% THC on average. Strains over 20% are widely available. But that is still not enough for Dario and his friends. They frequently use highly concentrated cannabis products known as shatter, oil, and wax, with average THC levels of more than 50%, up to 80%, and even higher. They prefer the concentrates in part because they get more buzz for their buck.
The high is a little different, I would say, and you definitely get like higher off of the oil, which is enjoyable for sure.
But what are the consequences of this high-test high? The data is scant.
Do they simply use less of a more potent product to get the same effect? And some studies have actually reported that, and some others have reported not so much. So I think that's a type of investigation I'd very much like to see done.
Important, but right now impossible. Despite the trend toward legalization by the states, marijuana is still classified by the federal government as a Schedule I drug, meaning it supposedly has no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. This makes it very difficult for researchers to do their work legally. Cannabis used in scientific studies must be acquired from a government-sanctioned grow site at the University of Mississippi, and it only produces flower, not the high-concentrate products. There is an urgent need to do this science. Dost Onger is chief of the Psychotic Disorders Division at McLean Hospital.
Research is showing that if you're smoking weed that is high in THC, the odds of developing a psychotic disorder are higher than if you're smoking weed that's low in THC. There's a lot of compelling evidence, but it's not necessarily final.
They're seeking clues by studying the way our nervous system interacts with cannabis. The internal wiring that regulates our perceptions and thoughts is not continuous. The nerve ends are called neurons, the gaps synapses. The electrical current is transmitted across the synapses by chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Our bodies naturally produce cannabinoids to help regulate the flow of these neurotransmitters.
So when somebody smokes cannabis, you're actually introducing chemicals that can hijack that system that's controlling brain chemistry. It appears that during some critical period in brain development, cannabis has this effect on the brain that actually disrupts normal functioning and predisposes people to a psychotic disorder, whereas in your 30s, it doesn't have the same effect.
In all of this research, it's difficult, if not impossible, to tease apart cause and effect. Does cannabis trigger these disorders, or do people with these problems gravitate toward the drug? And no one has taken a look at the implications of long-term recreational cannabis use on the fully formed adult brain. But recently, Stacy Gruber has taken a look at medical marijuana among adults, and she has some surprising conclusions.
We're seeing improvements in cognitive performance, specifically on tasks requiring executive function. We're also seeing improvements in clinical state. So significantly lower levels of depressive symptoms after only 3 months. And really important, we've seen some very striking decreases in the use of conventional medications.
Benefits, as opposed to the detriments she has documented in young people using pot heavily to just get high. Steve Mandley is a regular medical marijuana user.
Much better.
In 2004, while serving in the Army in Iraq, he got in an accident that left him with an excruciating back injury and a long list of prescription painkillers.
Over a 10-year period, I had taken 57 different medications, 9 different opioids. I believe in 2009, I was just getting on to fentanyl. I did 6 years on fentanyl, oxycodone for my chronic pain and then breakthrough pain.
It was a struggle, but he finally weaned himself off of opioids and now relies mostly on medical marijuana, which, unlike those prescription painkillers, has never caused an overdose death. But government studies show 9% of those who use marijuana will become dependent on the drug, much better than alcohol at about 23% or cocaine, 21%, but it is not risk-free. Steve Mandley is well aware of all of this, but remains convinced cannabis has made nearly every aspect of his life better.
Every person suffering deserves a choice. And let's stop looking at this as the initial idea back in the 30s, where this is something that's terrible, it's going to ruin the world. Let's get past all the stigma. Let's focus on the facts.
Once vilified, but now moving into the mainstream, cannabis is neither totally bad nor completely benign. It turns out weed is as much about shades of gray as it is green. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Miles O'Brien in Boston.